So welcome everyone to our weekly call once again. It's Monday again already. I will share my slides for a moment or two. Okay, which I think I've now done. Okay, so the theme this week, as you can see, we'll be talking about Zero Trust DNS, or depending on which side of the Atlantic, either ZTDNS or ZTDNS, or probably other pronunciations as well. I'm sure many other pronunciations are also available. So that will be the main thrust of the discussion today. Tommy and David will be joining that discussion. I can't see Aditi, but maybe Aditi may join in as well. If she does, that'd be fantastic. And the intention is we'll start the discussion this week. We couldn't quite get diaries to align, so we will revisit the topic probably on the 7th of July. When we'll also be joined by Cricket from Infoblox as well, and possibly others too. So this will be at least a two-part discussion on the topic. We won't this week then go on to talk about recent developments, or at least not in the same way we normally do, and that's principally because, as I was sort of discussing just before the call, I was having a problem with my technology over the weekend, which I only got to the bottom of about 3 hours ago. So I haven't yet been able to send out the sort of weekly headlines. So that will be something I'll share post call. But we may talk about a few things anyway, as well as always, some of the forthcoming events and a reminder what other topics we'll be touching on over the coming weeks. So that's the plan for the call. So I'm going to stop sharing at that point and come back to my camera. So as I say, we're going to sort of kick off the discussion this week, sort of first of at least a two-part conversation. So the sort of protagonists that are going to be joining us to start with, we got Tommy Jensen and Aditi Patange. I think, I'm not sure, but Aditi will tell me whether I got that right in a moment. Both from Microsoft, as well as David Redekop from ADAMnetworks. As a reminder, I'm sure everyone will be aware that both companies have product capability in this space, and I thought it would be useful to kick off the discussion really by sort of having a sort of the input informed by people that are already in the marketplace, as it were. So principally, because we might all theorize as to whether developments like this are the right answer, but they'll be informed by interaction with customers. So just briefly, do each of you want to unmute just so we can be confident that all of your technology is working, and just do a sort of 30-second introduction, starting with David, as actually you already got your camera up and running, and then I go to Tommy and Aditi.
All right, Tommy, I beat you to it. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Redekop, founder and CEO of ADAMnetworks, but really I am a technologist at heart, and I just love how DNS, this tiny little layer 7 application, can have such a wholesome impact on everything. And so I've been living this space for a long time, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know Tommy and Aditi recently as well.
Brilliant, thanks, David. Uh, Tommy or Aditi next?
Hey everyone, I'm Tommy Jensen. I've been a technologist on the Windows Core networking team for 6 years now, and DNS was where I started. Um, Been having a lot of fun working both in product and in standard space with, you know, always first love for the latter. Don't tell the shareholders. I met David, I believe, last year at DNS OARC, which is another fun
Right?
group I enjoy interacting with. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Tommy. And DT.
Hello. Thank you for having me over, Andrew. So, hello everyone. I'm Aditi. I am the product manager for ZTDNS. I have the great pleasure of working with Tommy every day, and I recently met David at RSA, so that's really exciting to see everyone here in this call together. I have been in the DNS space probably a lot less than Tommy and David, but I'm so excited to be here. There's always so much more that I learn from these two individuals every time we talk. So it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to what they have to say today.
Okay, well, if we start with a sort of small set of questions to ask, but I don't know if perhaps starting with any of you, you want to just kick off by perhaps doing a very short sort of précis of your respective product offerings. That might be useful just as a sort of a very high level sort of description of what you have in the marketplace, which since all of us have been at RSA relatively recently, that should be a well rehearsed summary to give. So we start there, and then we'll lead into a question about whether sort of ZTDNS or ZTDNS is really the security solution that CISOs have been searching for. So who wants to kick off with that?
Since I'm unmuted already, I can start and then I'll let David and Tommy give in the expert opinions. So at a very high level, ZTDNS is, if you look at it, a very simple solution that Tommy had architected. So all of the credit actually goes to him for designing this amazing feature. It's something that when ZTDNS is available on a Windows device, it blocks all outbound IP-based connections and only allows connections based on exceptions. So something that your protective DNS server thinks connection that resolves is something that we would allow, as well as we recognize that there are some endpoints which probably people don't connect through using domain names and are made connections are issued straight by IP address. This could be some actual known IP addresses. For instance, right now we are all talking on Zoom, and then Zoom probably has a set of IP addresses that it uses for this call to function, which we do need to allow. So we have a provision for allowing straight IP addresses, but all of this happens at the admin level. So if your device admin thinks that, okay, I should allow this IP address, or if your PDNS server says that this is a approved IP address, you should be able to talk to this. Only then ZTDNS that sits on your Windows device today would be able to send outbound IP-based traffic to those endpoints. So that's kind of a very high level idea of ZTDNS. Tommy thought about this because of the US government, which had a M2209 memo trying to make the cybersecurity for the country better and had some specific requirements around DNS. But ever since we announced ZTDNS last year at RSA, so it's been a slightly over a year since we have been talking about ZTDNS publicly, and we have been working on it for much longer. So we have seen a lot of other enterprises also interested in this, apart from the US government. So it's really great to see how different people want to see ZTDNS in their environments and the different use cases that they have come across for this.
Great. Thank you, Aditi. That was excellent. David, did you want to come in on the back of that and just with some, again, a sort of précis of the ADAMnetworks approach, which I know is, although it has the same letters, you have a slightly different sort of mechanism than Microsoft. And then we get into the question about whether it's the answer that CISOs have been searching for.
Yes, yes. Yeah, thank you, Aditi, for that really accurate description about how it works, how the mechanism works. I find that the biggest challenge is those of us that have lived in this space for a very long time. It's kind of a re-architecting of thinking, or what's the old expression, a paradigm shift of thinking differently about how traffic originates. So our approach is similar in that we do it at the gateway so that more endpoints can be protected, including ones that can't ever run ZTDNS or any solution like it. And this way you can have a broad approach where you're not only protecting roaming or multi-homed endpoints, but all of your risky IT, OT, IoT devices that you would like to protect in the same way as Aditi just described, then you can do that by implementing that same approach. And just for clarity, what Microsoft calls is ZTDNS or Zero Trust DNS, our naming of it has just been Don't Talk to Strangers. So if you see DTTS, ZTDNS, they're kind of equivalent just from two separate vendors, but at the core, the exact same concepts, including exemptions of DNS-less traffic, like the Zoom idea. And we're starting to see more and more applications that need this. And actually, just as a quick aside, I've also enjoyed working with Tommy and John Todd on a new proposed standard for how app developers can publish their IP discoveries outside of DNS, but with the DNS record, if that makes sense. It'll probably make sense once it's all finalized. So it was really nice to leverage your expertise in that experience you have, Tommy, in creating standards around something that needs to be abstracted. So yeah, that's the introduction here.
For that, David. Tommy, as the not architect looking at the chat, read out the chat, because that's a nice way of putting it. You wrote a pipe dream list of requirements down and talented engineers made it real somehow. But despite that, no doubt you're involved at the inception of the sort of Microsoft approach. Is there anything you want to add to sort of Aditi's general comments, and then we'll perhaps get into the more specific questions?
Let's get into it.
Okay, well, let's do that then. So, question, and take on board David's comment about your actual product is Don't Talk to Strangers, rather than even though it has similar functionality, albeit a different approach. So I'll try and genericize my question so it sounds like it's applicable to both parties. So with that sort of zero trust sort of approach to DNS now being out there, is this really the security solution that CISOs, so I'm thinking very much in the enterprise space here to begin with, is this the solution that they've really been searching for?
The way I'd put that is no, but it's what they didn't realize they asked for. I don't know if the call is familiar with the short story, The Monkey's Paw, which centers around this concept that there's this magic lamp, except it's a monkey's paw, and it will grant you wishes, but in ways that you didn't expect and usually unpleasant. That when CISOs say we need to be able to use domain names as boundaries, and when they say we need to be able to segment by web services, this is what they need to do, and it's not easy. They were hoping for something that would be much, much easier or applicable solely at the edge. So yes, but not literally.
Nice answer. And there is, just as an aside, I've relatively recently read a series of science fantasy books where one of the artifacts is indeed a monkey's paw. So there's a reference for you. um, David or Aditi, what are your thoughts on that? Perhaps based on some of the experience of your interactions at RSA and other fora. Is this the solution that either they've been searching for, or to Tommy's point, they didn't know they needed, but deep down, what is what they've been looking for?
I would absolutely echo what Tommy said with just a slightly different perspective, which is that CISOs that are looking for an ultimate, elegant, beautiful answer that just eliminates so much noise and narrows it down to something so predictable. They are looking for this, but it is something that requires a thought process and an experimentation and a proof of concept process. So it's not nearly the same kind of application as you would typically have with anything else. Any other security stack item that you add to your posture, it takes a completely different spot in the hierarchy and requires really careful thought. So I do expect that over time, when the result is in of what has been preemptively protected without knowing about a threat. I actually wrote a note here of what I wanted. If there's any security researchers that are listening to this, I think what would make a fantastic security research, maybe someone that's doing a postgrad, is something like X% of new threats of type Y can be preemptively mitigated with the combination of Zero Trust DNS, DTTS, and a protective resolver. Until we have that kind of metric that a decision maker is looking for, if I'm going to take the risk of making this change, what's my impact? There needs to be some kind of risk level associated with is where I think we're at today.
Aditi, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, great thoughts, Bits, Tommy and David. I think, especially I can speak to my interactions from CISOs at RSA. One story that I came across from RSA is I was talking to this one CISO, and we generally talked about, hey, what brings us to RSA? What are we trying to get out of this conference? And it was pretty evident that the CISO was there to buy a specific security solution. I'm not going to name one. Um, and they're like, yeah, I want to buy this solution. And then when you ask them why, they're like, because I want to buy it. And they don't really understand the reasoning behind, oh, why do they need the said solution? What is it going to do to their environment? How does it improve their security posture? Maybe somebody in their organization just told them that, hey, go try to find us this type of solution, or it came top down, who knows? So many CISOs are sometimes at RSA trying to buy a solution without knowing how it affects their deployment. And when I told them about my work and what ZTDNS does, the idea was so simple yet so powerful that they were able to grasp it in that moment. And even though they were there to buy a different type of solution, they're like, actually, you know what? This is interesting. I would love to test it out. And that's how we made it across and got another self-hosting customer. But I think the issue with a bunch of the security industry out there is we have a lot of jargon, and there's so many complex terminologies that we use. Sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's just a bunch of jargon that maybe a very a handful of people understand, but for others it's just, okay, it's something fancy, probably I need it, without understanding what it is. So I think the simplistic idea of ZTDNS or Don't Talk to Strangers would really stick with CISOs, and they would understand the value that it brings right off the bat. So that really makes it a good solution to talk to CISOs about.
Yeah, fair points. I guess compared to much of the sort of product portfolio that's out there in the security space, it's a pretty simple concept. There's plenty of stuff that you could learn about at RSA, which is may be fantastic, but is certainly not simple. So yeah, okay, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that's interesting to hear. Perhaps a side question before I get on to the next planned one. From your sort of respective experiences so far on sort of early deployments, do you have any feel for the size of the allow lists that are required in an enterprise, so that the thing just works relatively transparently most of the time to let people do what they do? Is there any such thing as a sort of typical allow list size, or does it vary so much that that's a meaningless question?
So there's two different concepts of allow lists in both of our products. One being the non-DNS endpoints, where you have to list outsiders saying these are going to be used without DNS discovery, like Teams and Zoom and etc. Those lists are surprisingly short. In 2025, almost everything is identified by domain name, to the point that at first, if you test without any CIDRs, lots of things just work, such that it's specific applications. You're like, oh, this is broken, rather than, hey, my networking is broken. From the name side, it's not as fortunate. Those lists tend to be fairly large. But this also depends on the customer. Lots of customers are taking a mid approach on a journey towards zero trust, or perhaps is sufficient for their threat models, where they do block lists and rely on ZTDNS to ensure that at least everything is resolved through them and that all resolutions are visible, even if they're not manually approving every name, which makes it a lot easier to deploy. Easier, not easy. But for some scenarios, because we always think about the endpoint scenario, right? Me doing general web browsing at my desktop. If you are running fixed endpoints, let's say that you want to run a desktop that's only used for doing builds of your product, or you're using a machine that's supposed to be only for financial controls, and you're not supposed to be using general web browsing. This is not a rare occurrence, and those lists are actually surprisingly short, especially if your DNS server uses left star rules.
Okay, that's helpful. David or Aditi, anything to add to that?
I would agree with Tommy's experience he just shared. Although our size of deployments are probably smaller than ones that Microsoft has done to date. Our largest deployment is somewhere in the order of 30,000 endpoints that are spread around the globe. And the allow list in terms of non-discovered IPs, non-discovered by DNS, is actually quite short. They end up being just the VoIP protocols, and those that choose to allow products like Telegram and WhatsApp, because again, because they tend to be VoIP related, and by design, the designers have said, you know what, in order to optimize our stun protocol, we will just use IP addresses directly. So similar experience. The only addition to that would be where there's legacy applications that are still referencing static IP addresses in the applications themselves. And those are very easily discovered by just, having a proper onboarding, a smart rollout experience where you run a test to see what is broken with a very fast rollback. But in that time, you've captured what the attempts were that were made at a network level that failed, and then simply add them. The experience ends up being like Tommy says, it's not easy, but it is predictably a path that just requires more steps, the more complex and the more legacy infrastructure there is that needs to be supported.
Interesting that you've got sort of similar sort of experiences in the round. Okay, well, let me put the next question first to Aditi then. So given all the positive sort of aspects that we've heard, why wouldn't enterprises go down this route? Are there any benefits of alternative approaches that would make it worth their while, going down a different, possibly more complex path? So almost the reverse sales pitch, if you like.
There's a couple of places where I would recommend people against going the ZTDNS direction. So especially when like we were talking about, ZTDNS is a very simple idea. It resonates with people. It gets them excited, and they want to test it out today. But one of the things I think I forgot to mention earlier was that when ZTDNS is active on the device, all DNS traffic leaving the device is encrypted. And when I'm talking to enterprises that get excited about ZTDNS, and then I ask them, hey, are you using encrypted DNS today? And if the answer is no, I'm like, okay, don't even try ZTDNS at this point. First, let's get you on the encrypted DNS train. And only after you're there, ZTDNS would make sense, or we can even think about it. So that is definitely one set of enterprise where I'm like, ZTDNS is not for everyone. It is for the people who are already a few steps ahead in their security journey, who are trying to secure an existingly more further secure a secure deployment. But if you're starting from insecure, I think the first step is definitely encrypted DNS. And there are other considerations as well. So ZTDNS is active at the device level, but there could be enterprises that are looking to do such domain name based lockdown on an identity level, on a user per device level. So maybe for one user on the device, they want to allow a certain set of things. Other users, they want to allow a different set of domain names. Or they could also want such enforcement at a process level, that the Edge browser should be able to talk to everyone, versus Chrome browsers or Teams should only be able to access Teams endpoints. That is not something that ZTDNS controls today. So we have device level enforcement, but we don't have user level or process level enforcement. So if that is something that the enterprise is looking for, then probably they should be going down searching some different solutions, and ZTDNS may not be for them.
That's helpful. That was a more, I was going to say honest. That sounds like I think you're dishonest. I don't mean that. That's a more forthright clarification than you often get. To be fair, when the product isn't for you yet, which is good to know. Thank you. David or Tommy. So David, do you any additional thoughts, different thoughts to that?
Yes, I want to add a little bit to that. From the perspective of fulfillment folks that are actually responsible for rolling out that DNS encryption update that Aditi references, the challenge that there is currently is that there hasn't been a consistent enough method yet. And this is one of my current areas of focus, is because in order for this to become widely adopted, the notion of encrypted DNS right from the endpoint, without the security folks giving up the control element, it's the Dr. Paul Vixie problem, right? That we all familiar with when encrypted DNS came about, it took away his control plane. But with this approach, guess what? The control plane is still back. The only thing is, the actual rollout of it is we have multiple different standards, and I'm not going to, I'm just going to lay it out transparently. I'm actually drafting a blog article on this right now. So we have iOS, for example, that is using DDR, but not in opportunistic mode. And we've got Windows running very well with DNR. And then we have Android that just says, you know what, we don't care about those standards. We've already checked as soon as we got a DHCP assigned DNS server if DOT is offered, so we use DOT. So we've got the three most popular operating systems all handling it differently. So in the real world, you have IT management solutions that, would love to have all of that standardized. And some of this is just wrestling back and forth and coming up with a method that works for everybody. But I think there's some work to be done for that to become a reality. In the meantime, when someone does want this, they just have to decide, how many ways of having that DNS encryption delivered is acceptable and be prepared that it's going to take multiple methods today.
Yeah. And an interesting point about the different discovery standards. Yeah, the answers are always standard somewhere along the way. Tommy, anything to add? And then I'll open up to see if people have got any comments or questions. No? Okay, so in that case, I'm conscious that plenty of people on the call that may have different points of view, perhaps are in the space where they're offering different solutions. Any thoughts on that in terms of sort of what you heard, or questions based on what you heard, or comments, different points of view? And if you have unmute and talk, put something in the chat, raise your virtual hand, whichever's the easiest option for you.
While we wait for some folks to maybe pose some questions, if it's all right, Andrew, can I quickly share with you what we've been doing with iOS?
Sure.
Yeah. So in the iOS networking extension world, you pointed that out too recently, Tommy, on how much development there has been on that front, which has been really good. We have a test flight deployment right now that makes use of doing the same concept of Zero Trust DNS, but at the iOS level, not relying on any VPN, not relying on the URL filter at all, but with the same concept of every destination must be looked up by a permitted, by policy, a protective resolver DNS answer in order for that destination to be opened. But with the additional capability that not only can we make IP-based exemptions, but we can also now draw a boundary around process groups. And so, for example, we can just exempt the entire Zoom app or the entire Teams app if there is an internal app that's highly trusted and we're not concerned about it ever getting to be a tool used by a malicious process, then it can just be exempted completely. So it's a different method of allowing the exemption. So for things like, how do you discover any network traffic that isn't going to be using DNS, then one of the ways to do the very simple onboarding with it is, okay, let's have everything exempt except Safari, as an example, or let's have everything blocked except for Teams, and so forth. So there's the options are quite flexible in the iOS world, and the fact that this ecosystem exists now is exciting because we can now deliver these proper security solutions in other platforms as well.
Yeah, good to raise that. And I see Tommy, as you were talking, has posted a link to the announcements that came out. Was it only last week? Was it last week? I think it was last week in Cupertino. So if anyone's not completely caught up with that, there is a link in the chat. So that'll be in sort of with developers as we speak. So it was good to see that not just things like liquid glass sort of user interfaces, lovely though they are, were announced, but actual some more useful stuff so under the hood came out through the week, including sort of with sort of DNS sort of relevance in some cases. Okay, so let's just check again. Anyone got any questions or comments? I'm wondering whether perhaps those of you in the protective DNS space, for example, may have a different perspective you would, or complementary perspective even you might wish to offer. So
I was exchanging some emails with Tommy actually just end of last week, beginning of this. Thanks for the answers, Tommy. No, I think it's complementary as somebody who works in that area. Clearly, ZTDNS relies on a protective DNS service somewhere on the network. It's very complementary. The thing that I actually went back to for the benefit of the audience here, if they've not seen it, is a previous presentation that Tommy gave outlining what it was. This was very early days. There wasn't a public preview then. But one of the things I remember is a slide talking about the implementation. Obviously, the point made earlier, having the encrypted DNS on first, but at some point, you're then going to plug that into protective DNS, and that could be in a log-only mode, or you could have ZTDNS in a log-only mode on the Microsoft clients, and then work that way. So it was interesting what Tommy said earlier about possibly I'm going to use the wrong term here, but halfway house. I think there are perhaps many organizations that may not want it quite so strict, quite so early, or just don't have that kind of environment within their company culture or whatever it is. So, but I could still see ZTDNS being useful in that to secure that last mile, to make sure people are using the right resolvers and not open public resolvers, which could be a security issue, but not doing a default equals no will allow these things. More doing a traditional protective DNS of this is the bad stuff. We're going to block this through threat intel, and we're going to let the rest go. Clearly, there's a risk appetite an organization will have. So, that would just be my general comments on it, I think.
Okay, fair comments. Of course, the modern so one I'm down with all the cool kids is the shadow AI, is I think one of the current threats in the enterprise space, where everyone's got their own preferred but not necessarily corporately authorized AI tools, and are unknowingly dumping all sorts of confidential information into the large language models, which is fantastic for training data, but not so great for confidentiality. So I think there are some of the tools now are starting to really be useful to clamp down on blocking access to the unofficial tools.
Yeah, and you could do that with that sort of shadow IT with protective DNS response policy zone type things too. It doesn't have to be just the malware stuff. It can be network policy. So whether that's copyright or gambling or whatever, there are that use case too. So yeah.
Good comments. Thanks, Jim. Ross, looked like you also are muted.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, kind of building a little bit on what Jim was saying in the reference to network policy. So obviously, I understand that David is more on we're going to use the network side to enforce this rather than the operating system. And I was just curious about like Tommy and Aditi's view of that. Is this really more of a role for the operating system, right? Having it in Windows is great, but what if you have other type of clients? How do you protect those? And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, or do you kind of think, hey, the operating system is really the only way that we can truly enforce it? I mean, obviously, you have direct control over the connections each client is making, but unfortunately, we live in a world where there are a lot of devices out there that don't have a full operating system or have who knows what networking stack running on a lot of IoT devices and stuff. And how could we do both, basically? How could we have a network component that applies it as well as tying in with what we're doing in the operating system? If you guys have thought about that at all.
I personally view them as complementary. For one, they can rat out on each other when you have compromises. A key part of zero trust mentality is that any aspect of your deployment can be compromised. And so if the endpoints end up compromised, then the network edge, don't talk to strangers, is going to rat you out and say, it's been trying to connect to things I didn't resolve. It shouldn't be doing that. On the flip side, the endpoint has much greater visibility into things like processes. So ZTDNS logs will be able to tell you this specific process is contacting this domain name that the network boundary isn't going to know about, where you may expect some services to only use specific domain names and others not. And if you see generic endpoints or even proxying endpoints that you expect for some processes but not others, those logs are insightful. Frankly, I think customers ought to deploy both.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see an argument for it. I mean, I actually was Josh Kuo and I, when we wrote our book back in 23, we talked about it from the network side. The only thing that I haven't seen come out is, how are we going to create a way for the gateways and the DNS servers to talk to each other, to exchange that information without it having to be, one device. Obviously, having it be one device where it's doing both of those roles is one thing, but would there be a way to develop a protocol for the gateways to, see that traffic and say, okay, I need to talk to the DNS server to validate that this has been resolved? Like in a standards way, so it's not like just one, you can do it with your Cisco or Arista or whatever it is, or Palo Alto, whatever particular brand. Should there be a standard for that communication?
Selfishly, I have not given it much thought because it's outside of our business ownership, but I would agree with you. Realistically, there's probably going to be some environments where those things aren't co-located, and it would be better if every vendor didn't have their own lock-in solution. That said, I don't have answers off the top of my head. The gateway question does bring up an interesting example of why you would want endpoint, which is when you don't have a network edge at all. When you have work from home devices, work from anywhere devices that you don't want to send all your traffic through a given gateway, then you have that. Anyway, I'll let Aditi speak more.
I think you covered. David, go ahead. I saw you unmute.
Well, as soon as Ross posed the question around new standard, I was smirking. I was glad that I wasn't the one trying to rope Tommy in for another standards discussion. But the reality is that is something that we have started to develop internally for our needs. But you're absolutely right, Ross, that this would be better to be something that would be standards across multiple vendors. But we can at least bring the experience of what we have found to be necessary so far to help craft that standard. So it's only a matter of time before that's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear what your learnings play out to be as you've seen all that, because I do think it's inevitable at some point that we've got to have that communication between the DNS side and the network gear to do the policy, the network policy, referring back to what Jim was saying. And that's actually what Josh and I had called it in the book, was network DNS and network assured policy, because the network is the enforcement mechanism for the DNS policy that you're applying through the protective DNS, and the network is enforcing that you're using the appropriate protective DNS with the appropriate policy.
Well, I am embarrassed that I haven't read your book, but that'll be next on my list then.
Thanks.
Perfect.
I'm going to boldly brainstorm on a publicly recorded call. Is there a reason that the gateway couldn't simply act as another DNS client and just query the resolver and get its same allowed resolutions as the endpoints it's supposed to be enforcing traffic on?
I don't think there's any reason that it wouldn't be. I mean, there are firewalls today that do that, where they'll look stuff up. So I can't imagine there would be any way where that's necessarily a problem. I think the question you get into is you start worrying about like a race condition where, who's querying it first, and did the gateway accidentally trigger itself to open up?
And certainly, as you say, Ross, I know quite a few sort of proxy solutions do exactly that. If, for example, if they're uncertain, Tommy may smile at this, about the reliability of SNI data, then that's one of the ways they overcome that, by checking whether it matches what the certificate says. But that's a whole different discussion potentially, so I won't sidetrack people on that. But yeah, there are other mechanisms that broadly do that today, so that'd be a reasonable approach to think about. See, I was secretly hoping when you asked the question, Ross, about what about the non-Windows devices, that see, back in the day, a Microsoft person probably said, well, you just bin those. Why would you have them?
Well, unfortunately, the IT people don't always get to choose all of that.
Absolutely. And of course, that would be a tough thing to do today. That was definitely tongue in cheek. And to be absolutely clear, I wouldn't expect a Microsoft person to say that. Okay, any last comments or questions for any of Aditi, Tommy, or David? I see one in the chat, so let me ask that. Yeah, in new sort of Zero Trust DNS or Don't Talk to Strangers deployments, do you see end users trying to bypass organizational controls like VPNs? What resistance do administrators run into? So
I'm happy to jump. I'm happy to
ahead.
jump into my experience, and then I want to hear yours as well. But there's absolutely no question that that's happening. But I can also tell you with a relative giddy excitement that those efforts largely fail, because those circumvention efforts tend to rely on, finding open IP addresses on the internet that are listed, that have open proxies or VPN protocols. And retail VPNs tend to, by and large, either use one common domain name and then for the app, for example, but then just have a preloaded list of IP addresses. And with the ZTDNS, DTTS approach, those connections simply don't work. So it turns out that it is actually one of the strongest anti-circumvention tools that exist today. Doesn't mean people aren't trying, but if anybody's interested in one of the ones that we always test against is Siphon, which by itself is a phenomenal tool. If you find yourself in Shanghai and you need access to your Google services, you're going to need something like that. But about the same token, if it's used corporately to bypass controls, you don't want it to work. And so it's one of those double-edged swords that this approach actually prevents from working. How about you, Aditi?
Yeah, I was gonna say, probably David would have a better answer because we are still very early in our preview testing. So, right now we are just having enterprises test it out to see if their day-to-day use cases work, and we totally expect end users to try to circumvent any policies. It's very normal for people to do that. But largely, as David said, even in the ZTDNS scenario, we don't expect those efforts to actually get any sort of fruitful efforts.
It reminded me of some stuff I was reading at the weekend from some users of school-based content filtering, where they were venting their frustration with the companies for preventing them from, for example, playing games in class, etc., which there's a lovely series of adverts turning the comments that they'd received round into why that means their product is a good product. Just throw that out there. I can't remember the company, but it was quite an interesting piece. But with some response to what we were
If I may, Andrew, if I may, just to on that particular note, on a school district that we've recently signed up, the POC went for almost a year, and that was the very specific reason why the entire school district rolled out our approach to prevent the browser-based extensions like the OLA VPNs of the world from working. And so it's as time permits and folks have an opportunity to socialize what their own experience is like, provided that they've gotten past the initial friction of deploying it, stuff broken, and then fixing things up. there's going to be a consistent growth of fanfare if the past couple of years are an indication of the future path. So, yeah, I think we're to your comment there, Ross. I think we're in a place of still slow adoption so far. That as the broader impact is understood, that it'll eventually just become a default base standard.
Maybe that's a good comment to end on, other than to say, we'll revisit this discussion probably on the 7th, and we'll add hopefully Cricket from Infoblox into the mix as well. So if between now and then people come up with other sort of comments or questions, you can sort of inject them into the discussion at that point. But it's certainly a topic I've been thinking about over the last little while, and I am sort of coming around to the view that if I was a CISO, and I wouldn't envy the enterprise that I was a CISO for, but notwithstanding that, then I think I'd probably be looking very closely in this area as part of my basic sort of security stance. But thank you, David, Aditi, Tommy, for coming on and sort of giving us that first sort of run through the conversation. I hope that was useful for everybody. As I say, we'll lead this into a further discussion in a few weeks' time, so we can extend this topic more broadly. So I hope that started to give you some food for thought on this. I will very briefly, in the roughly 60 seconds I have left, as I said at the outset, I didn't have an opportunity to do sort of news headlines this week because of, ironically, technical problems. I'll send those out hopefully in the next 24 hours. Just a reminder, there's stuff coming up, a few deadlines, and I see my editing failed slightly, but the ITF draft agenda will be published for comment on the 20th, so the end of this week. And there's a NetNode call for presentations, which is comments on the 21st. And then pretty soon after that, the 27th, we got the final agenda for the ITF 123 meeting coming up, amongst other things. So that's all good to see. A whole load of events still, as you can see, sort of running through. Don't know why WWDC's there, so that is not happening. But first is happening. You've got the ICANN 83 readout in a couple of days' time on Wednesday, first in a week, and also the IGF next week as well. Again, plenty of other stuff coming up. And a reminder, we won't have a call next Monday because I'll be in Oslo for the Internet Governance Forum. But if you happen to be at the IGF as well, or in Oslo anyway on Monday, feel free to let me know. It'd be good to catch up in person rather than virtually. So I hope that was useful to everyone. Thank you to our sponsors at DNSOR for sponsoring the call, which is, as always, their support is much appreciated. Thank you again to our main contributors. So thank you, Aditi, David and Tommy, and have a fantastic week, everyone. And as I say, if you're in Oslo or Lillestrøm next week, let me know and we can meet up to have an extremely expensive beer or coffee somewhere in Scandinavia. But it's the company that counts, so maybe see a few of you then. Have a great week, though, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks' time, if not there. See you all.